quiet enough. Heyo, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am talking about the things that I don't understand and why I don't even really want to understand them actually. The thing is, not everything about Christianity makes a lot of sense. And when I was younger, I used to think I had to understand literally everything, have all of the answers to every single theological question because of that verse in 1 Peter 3:15 that I memorized at VBS. It's like, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you. That was the translation that I learned at least. And so then that was a lot of pressure for like a poor little kid. It's like, you always have to be ready to explain everything to anyone who asks you any sort of question about Jesus. And you're just like, I don't know. And there are so many things that like, even the greatest theologians, like they haven't figured out. And so I was like, how am I supposed to do this? What? I'm just 10, like what? But then I read a different translation, by the way, that said, be ready to give a reason for the hope that is in you. And that made a whole lot more sense because then it's not saying that every Christian has to like have all these great theological answers for every single crazy question that non-believers are going to ask them. Like, can God make a rock too big for him to pick up? It's like, when they ask us about the hope that's in us, like we ought to be living in a way that shows outsiders the hope that we have, that they see something different and then they ask us about it. And then like all of us, we're all perfectly capable of explaining about God because we all have a different experience with him. Like the way that I would explain my relationship with God or like explain who he is to someone else is very different from someone else's because my experience of him is different from someone else's. And so it's not like every single Christian needs to learn this speech and give it to anyone who asks them about their life, I guess. No, we all have the capability to explain about our personal experience and relationship with Jesus. And so then that was a lot more encouraging to me. I'm like, oh, great, I don't have to have the answers. And yet, there are a lot of other things that I really want to have the answers for. And I'm the kind of person that I just love to understand things. I really want to figure things out, put all the pieces together and like see this great picture and be like, yes, see, it all makes sense. And I don't like having things that I don't get to know yet. And there are a lot of things like that in Christianity that it's like we aren't going to understand until heaven. And I don't think that used to sit very well with me because I was just like, God, I want to have these answers. Like, and when people do ask me hard questions about my faith, like I want to be able to explain things to them and make it make sense so like they won't judge me or like they'll choose this for themselves also. And yet, more recently, I've come to appreciate the fact that I don't understand everything. I was reading a couple of verses in, like, John 14 through 17. Somewhere in there. One of them's in John 14. And it was kind of talking about this of, like, we don't really understand. Because it's like Jesus giving his last instructions to his disciples. And he said, like, I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear. And that's one reason that we don't understand things. It's like, our brains just, they don't work like God's. Like, he is so much bigger and greater and far above us. We're made in his image, but like, he's the real deal. And like, we don't have all of the functions and all the capabilities that he has just because we're made in his image. It's like the difference between a real person and a photograph. It's like the photograph can't think or smell or anything. Like, it has some similarities to the real person, but like, it's not the same thing. And it's kind of like that with us and God. Like, he himself, he works so much differently than we do. And so here we are, like, limited by time and space and our own brain capacity. And it's like, he doesn't tell us things like sometimes I used to think that like God used to like to keep secrets from us and mysteries from us just for the fun of us like not really knowing. But really it's like that verse, I read it in a different version and it was like saying like he has so much more that he wants to tell us and yet we're not going to be able to understand. And I was like, that makes so much more sense. Like, God, with his compassionate heart, like he wants us to be able to understand. He wants to share himself with us and to help us to see his bigger picture. And yet he can't because we don't understand. Like, we're held back by our human limitations. Like, our brains just wouldn't be able to understand it. We can't comprehend the concept of him being three people and yet one person at the same time. Like, that's one thing that doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we just can't really think that way. But I think we're going to be able to think that way in heaven. It's going to make a lot more sense. We're going to be able to wrap our minds around all of these seeming paradoxes. But yeah, like, he wants to be able to explain to us things like that, and yet we aren't going to be able to understand right now. And that's another question of like, why did he make it so that we can't understand everything? And it's like, I don't know. But then there was another verse in, maybe that one was the John 14 one. But it's saying like, I have a lot more to say to you, but I won't now because the prince of the world is coming. And I read it in a different version that made it sound more like he's not going to tell them more because, like, you know, he's about to be betrayed. Like, the people are literally, like, coming for him, so there's not enough time. But just thinking about that a little bit was making me, I don't know why it gave me this thought process, okay? Don't judge me for the way that my brain works. But, like, I don't know, in some ways, like, I don't want to understand everything. Like, he doesn't tell us everything because we're still living in the world. There's still evil. Like, the princess's world still rules over us. And so he doesn't explain everything to us so that we get to live our lives out of walking by faith when we can't see, and just trusting him and putting our hope in him. And I don't know, I kind of like living a life that doesn't make any sense. Even a life that in some ways doesn't make sense to me. Because then I feel like that's so much of a greater testimony. We admit we don't have all of the answers, and yet this hope still sustains us. And that kind of shows that we're onto something bigger than us. Like, if this can still satisfy us even without completely understanding everything, I feel like that's a pretty good sign that it is something out of the ordinary. And it would make sense, because if we had a God, like, he wouldn't be like us. He would be bigger than us, more infinite than us, have all of these things that are true about him that we can't understand, or like all of these purposes and plans for lives that we literally, like, our brains can't wrap around. And so I feel like it's a good testimony to the truth of that like, we don't fully understand everything, because it shows that we're serving a God who is greater than us. We may not be able to explain everything, but I think that is kind of proof in and of itself that this is true, which may sound kind of like counterintuitive. And so I don't really want to understand everything. I want there to be some questions. I want there to be a lot of ways that God is still God to me, because also then that would set me up for a lot of pride if I could understand everything. But as it is now, God is God. He's so much greater than me. And I'm fine with it being like that. Like, I'm fine serving a God who's bigger than me, who understands more than me, who has more power than me, and yeah, can see circumstances for what they are and for how they can turn out, and like, he'll work out everything, because I don't understand. If I was in charge, it would not be great. I would mess up a lot, even with good intentions, just because I can't see and understand everything. But like, I'm glad that I serve a God like that, a God who is bigger than me, and that I don't fully understand everything about him. Like, I'm so excited for the day when we shall know fully, even as we are fully known, and like see him face to face, something like that. But like, I do believe that one day we're going to fully know him and other people as well as he knows us, which is crazy to think about, knowing God that deeply. But I think when we get to heaven, like, we will be capable of that then, because he is going to change us from the perishable seed to the imperishable, and we're going to be very different. I honestly don't even understand why there is, and now, like, why we're still on the earth. Like, there's so many questions that I have that, like, I don't understand, but I'm fine having to have a period of my life where I have to walk by faith and not by sight, because again, it's not even going to last very long. Like, in perspective, however long I'm going to live, that's nothing compared to how long I'm going to live in heaven. Being able to understand everything, having the satisfaction of being like, oh my goodness, it did all make sense. God, you were right all along. Why didn't I trust you? But yeah, like, I don't want to have all of the answers, because I think that does have an even better chance of making people curious about the hope that we carry within us, because it's not something that we can explain or like give logical proof for, so that obviously everyone would join in because it makes so much sense. It's like, no, there are things that don't make sense about it to me, and yet this is still what I'm choosing, and yet this is still sustaining me. This is giving me peace and joy beyond what the world could, a peace that the world doesn't understand, peace that I don't understand. I don't have all the answers, and I'm actually now coming to a place where I'm fine with it being that way. I have my moments where I'm like, God, why'd you have to make it this way? But in a healthy mindset, I am glad that I don't get it yet. I hope that that's encouraging to the people who see my life and who see that I don't understand everything, and yet I'm still choosing this and still walking this, and this is still enough for me. Because I really feel like that does give a little bit of evidence that we are on to something bigger than us. Like, we're on the right trail somehow. So anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye until more interesting things happen. I'm gonna do that instead of my dance, because the dance was weird.